By the time you hit adulthood, you take thousands of forward steps a day without a single conscious thought. The reality is, the last time your brain actively engaged in the complicated task of learning how to walk was when you were a toddler. Once you figure out a movement's mechanics, your cerebellum steps in. To conserve energy, it hardwires that effort into a single automated pathway. That pathway perfectly handles your daily commute in the background. Your conscious brain checks out completely. But biological efficiency comes at a steep price. When your nervous system stops paying attention to how you move, you create the exact conditions for both physical and cognitive decay. The first consequence is mechanical wear and tear. Decades of perfectly repeated forward strides mean the same impact points take the brunt of your weight daily, especially the patellofemoral joint, where your kneecap rests against your thigh bone. The second consequence happens in your neural circuits. Because forward walking requires zero active balancing from an adult, the complex spatial networks in the brain simply stop getting a workout. Year after year, walking smoothly down predictable paved sidewalks, those spatial networks atrophy. When you finally encounter a sudden trip or an uneven surface, your brain is entirely out of practice for dealing with the challenge. Your mastery of forward motion creates a biological vacuum. The brain aggressively prunes whatever it isn't actively using, meaning it simply stops maintaining the balance circuits you no longer force it to rely on. To stop this decline, you have to manually override your biological autopilot. You have to walk backward. Moving in reverse completely changes your gait. Instead of driving your heel into the ground and sending shockwaves up your leg, you land softly on your toes and roll backward to the heel, safely absorbing the kinetic energy. Researchers like Gondolekar and his team found this exact kinematic reversal is highly effective at treating patellofemoral pain syndrome, a chronic form of knee pain. This schematic illustrates how the load shifts. Walking forward, massive downward force slams directly into your patella on every step. But take a backward step, and the stress vanishes. The load shifts entirely to your posterior chain, forcing hamstrings and calves to stabilize your weight. Reversing the mechanics gives your primary walking muscles a rest while actively rehabilitating the specific joints that forward walking systematically grinds down. Yet the relief on your knees is only the mechanical foundation. The real value of moving in reverse is the massive sensory and neurological shift it forces upon your brain. Removing your visual safety net forces a process called proprioceptive recalibration. Because you can't see where your foot is going to land, your body has to rely entirely on internal spatial awareness to keep you upright. This heat map shows the reaction to sensory friction. Stripped of visual planning, the cerebellum is shocked out of its dormant state, flaring with activity during novel motor learning. It immediately begins rebuilding circuits, aggressively firing up neuroplastic regions normally targeted by cognitive decline. The sheer physical confusion of moving blindly acts as a powerful neurological stimulant, waking up the precise balance pathways that forward walking put to sleep. Clinical medicine already applies this mechanism. Studies by Yang and colleagues show that stroke rehabilitation programs actively use reverse treadmill walking to help patients rebuild shattered neural pathways. The mechanics of your lower body act as a direct gauge for the overall processing power of your brain. A major study published in The Lancet identified a highly specific fall risk predictor in older adults, the tendency to stop walking when talking. The premise is straightforward. If a person has to physically halt their stride to answer a simple question, their brain lacks the cognitive bandwidth to manage speech and balance at the same time. That processing bottleneck points directly back to those degraded cerebellar circuits. Because their automated pathways are failing, staying upright demands too much conscious attention. Maintaining balance over a lifetime is a cognitive processing challenge. It requires active neural training to keep the brain's hardware running smoothly. You don't need to completely abandon forward walking to get these benefits. The concept of the adaptation curve shows that the goal is simply to interrupt your routine. This line graph tracking cerebellar excitability shows the exact timeline. Just 10 minutes of continuous backward movement is enough to trigger a massive, steep spike in neuroplasticity before the brain begins to level off. That short, concentrated dose of sensory friction forces your joints to rest and your neurons to fire, acting as a direct antidote to decades of physical repetition. To keep your brain sharp and your joints healthy as you age, you have to deliberately seek out physical confusion. You have to move backward to ensure your mind can keep moving forward.